Alright, there's several ways to finish off these with the hindquarters here. One of the easy ways to do it is to split the backbone right here and take in the two pieces. You can also take and just debone that right here and come off to the hip joints and carry that in like that. But I'm just going to cut it real quick with the saw. Alright, we've got that in two, and I'll cut these off here and then carry them in. So then we'll get inside and we'll show you how to break them down. Something pretty obvious but sometimes gets overlooked. This gambrel that this deer is hanging from, it's got a pivot in the middle. So it works as a scale or a balance or a seesaw. If I lift one off, the other end's going to come down and drop it on the ground. So you have to get both these off at the same time. It's easier to do if your tree branch doesn't move up out of your reach. Alright, we're going to take them in the house. We are fixing to start on this back part of the leg. And the back part of the leg is pretty simple. Breaks down pretty easy. Since we split that tailbone, we have the rump roast, top round, the bottom round, the eye of round, and the sirloin tip. And there'll be a test on this later. So
pay attention.
Pay attention. So the first thing, there's a couple ways you can go about this. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to cut the sirloin tip off. Knee joint right here. Find the end of it. Hit the bone, turn. Go down the bone till you're about even with the pelvis, till you're about even with the pelvic bone. Then turn and come out. Then sharpen your knife. Okay, that gives us a sirloin tip. Then, right here, we're going to cut right there, and we're going to cut right back over here, and we're going to take the rounds off. The end of the pelvis right here kind of lets me know where to go. You'll hit a bone right there probably. Right there. There we go. Cut around this bone. And that gives us the rounds. From the middle here, we'll start to open this up. And there's a seam here you'll follow. Don't cut into the muscle, just kind of separate the two pieces of muscle. And there we end up with the top round, the bottom round, and the eye of round. We can take this eye out. A lot of times when I have cut round steak, which can go through a tenderizer pretty well and make really good chicken fried steak, or when I have cut roast out of these, I leave the bottom round and the eye of round and the bottom round attached. They stay attached pretty well. There is some glands and a little piece of meat there. You take that out. And there's a little piece of that sirloin tip. You don't have to take that off, but I do. And it'll go in my grind. And then there's a real thick piece of tendon here. Switch knives. I'll just go ahead and cut that off. And you turn it over. Slide your knife under. A couple different ways to do this, but slide your knife under. Take that off. Kind of a rind. Silver skin, kind of. So this deer right now at this point, as I'm bringing these pieces in right now, this deer's been hanging in that tree in the yard for over 24 hours. Really good and cool. Alright, there you have that good piece of meat, mostly red meat. And there's just a little bit of a seam right there. That makes a nice roast. If you're into curing and corning, this is a good piece to do that. If you're into smoking, this is a good piece to smoke. You can take this, and the meat grain's kind of running this way, so you cut it this way and make steaks out of it. It's going to be tough. This is the back leg. This is a heavy used piece, like all around on beef or anything. But you can make steaks out of this. If you're going to cook it in a way where the steak cooks in the juice and really starts to get tender, you can use it like that. Another thing is to tenderize these steaks, and they make good chicken fried steak. Also, this is a really good piece to cut into your jerky, or thin pieces like that you're going to marinate in something. And so that's probably what's going to get done with this one. This is going to get cut into jerky. There's a round. That's an eye in the bottom. Here's the top round. We're going to clean up the top round. And it's pretty much the same as the bottom round. Same process, same uses. It's a little bigger piece of meat. Really good for the smoking and the curing and those kind of things. farmer's market before Christmas, right?
Yep.
There is a pretty fatty vein right here, and some people leave that. Where I used to cut deer meat professionally at a store that processed a lot of game meat, elk and antelope and deer and moose and bighorn sheep, they liked for me to cut this out. The owners did, and they just felt like it made a cleaner product, and I do too. And so that's still what I do. I cut that vein out. And just like the other round, there's a good clean piece of meat. You can do all kinds of things with it, and it's a nice roast. If you like a good meaty boneless roast, right there's a good deer roast. Throw both these rounds in a crock pot with some potatoes and carrots and onions and garlic, and you have an excellent Sunday afternoon meal, or after a long day at work and had them in the crock pot all day. I'm going to take this little piece off too, because I don't really like the way that looks. And remember, when you're cutting meat, especially when you're cutting it for yourself, cut it the way you like it. If you know you're not going to use a roast, don't cut a roast. If you know you'd rather eat roast, cut lots of roasts. You can do that out of the chuck, the front shoulder. There's 3 roasts here. I'm going to clean up this sirloin tip and show you that one too. But all these roasts can be cut into steaks also. Alright, sirloin tip. This has been sitting out in the cool air, so that film has gotten good and hard on it. So I just grab a hold of that. Peel that off. Corner a little bit of tendon right here that I'm going to fillet off. That sinew, take that off. When you cook a roast, a lot of sinew just gets chewy and tough, and it's not attractive. So there, that's sirloin tip. Make steaks like this. This is the muscle running this way, so you can make steaks like that. That's how you always cut deer steaks. You always cut them against the grain. Helps make things tender. So if the grain's running this way, you cut the steaks this way. Cut it that way, make steaks. They're not quite as tough as a round, but they're still pretty tough. Make good tenderized for chicken fried steak. This is a good chunk for cutting stew meat. It's a good chunk for cutting jerky. It's a nice chunk for smoking, just like the rounds. And it's similar in texture, and it does have a seam of attachment. It is a couple of different muscles, so it does have an attachment seam right down through the middle, but it's still pretty good just like that. And this is a nice small steak or small roast. I tell you that one of the best ways I've ever had this roast is it was covered in it was seasoned with black pepper and garlic and onion powder, and then wrapped in bacon and put in a smoker, and that makes a really good smoked piece of meat. My friend Joe in Wyoming used to do that a lot with different pieces of meat, and this was a good one to do that with. So, but I'm making jerky, so a lot of this is going to get cut into jerky on my deer. Showed you how to take those out. A lot of those pieces I trimmed off, I'll go through them and cut the nasty parts off, and the big pieces of fat or sinew off, and they'll go in my grind pile or in my stew meat if they're big enough. Let's get back to this rest of this deer leg. Rump roast. This is the rump roast. Here is the top of the backbone. Here's where the anus was. This is the bottom of this is the leg. That's the rump roast right up here. And it goes to the top of that hip joint. There's a couple ways to do that. If you don't mind deer bones, if you don't mind bone-in deer, cut that leg off right there, clean some of this up, and it's a roast. Okay? I debone all my deer. We just have found over the years that we eat it better that way. And more meat in the freezer doesn't do you any good if you'd rather go buy hamburger than eat it. So you need to learn to cut it the way you will eat it best. That is the best way to make the most use of your meat. Even if you end up losing a little bit that you feed to the hogs or the dogs or something, if you won't eat it, it's not gaining you anything. So cut it the way that you will eat it best. We like it deboned. And so that is what I'm doing. My kids learned to cut deer meat that way, and I have recently heard a story where my son was cutting with somebody that didn't cut it that way and got teased a little bit about how picky he was about how he cut his deer. But we've learned to really like it this way, and I can tell you that I have fed deer meat to people that they didn't know it was deer. Or I've fed deer meat to people who say, I don't really like deer, but I'm going to try it anyways. Again, and they say that's the best deer meat I've ever eaten. Because we do debone it, because we do take sinew and fat off of it, we take some of the gamey flavor out of it. It also makes it a nice texture. So I'm just going to start right here. This is kind of where the spine was, and right here is kind of a little bit of a pin or a hip joint. And I'm just cutting down that. And I'm coming to the shoulder, or to the hip here where the ball is. And that, I'm hitting that more than I expected to. I can tell you that anymore I do 2 or 3 or 4 of these a year, and it takes me a little hunting around to get them just right. Sometimes when I used to do a couple thousand a year, there was no feeling around for anything. I just knew where everything was, but I don't remember from year to year or from deer to deer that well anymore. So. You'll feel those bones, and you just cut around them. We've removed that rump roast. We'll clean that up. You can see here is the pelvis bones. Here's the bottom of the pelvis where we split it with an axe when I field dressed it. Here's where we just cut it in two with the saw. And there's the bottom of the pelvic bone. There's the top. That's the anal chute. There's the hip joint, and then we've got the shank, and that shank will just be deboned and cleaned up so that we can put it in our grind, or some of it's big enough chunks it'll go in the stew meat. So take this rump roast, we'll cut a few of these chunks of fat out of it. I know some people don't mind the flavor of deer fat, and a young buck like this or a good young doe, it probably isn't too bad. I know that depending, we have killed deer that were eating mostly alfalfa and soybeans, that flavor was great, even of the fat. But then I've killed old bucks out of the brush that couldn't stand the smell of it hardly. And you definitely didn't want the fat on there. So this young buck, I'm going to cut most of the fat off. That's kind of my practice on deer. It's the reason when Cindy's made sloppy does that a lot of people would have argued that it was beef sloppy joes instead of deer sloppy does. Because we try to trim it up well and make it get anything to give it an off flavor out of there. So cut those fat pieces out and stuff. Then go over here. Some deer will have a lot of fat right here. This one wasn't that fat, which surprised me where he'd been eating, but he wasn't poor either. He just didn't have a lot of extra fat on him. So I killed this deer out of oak bottom where he was eating on acorns when I shot him. But I can tell you that he had, I'm sure, had been in the wheat field and been in the cut soybeans and been in the hay and stuff like that. So he's eating a lot of good stuff. Be good meat. Slide that. Keep cutting that kind of tendon or rind off of here. Okay, you can roll that and tie that and make a roast if you want. There's some good big muscle pieces here to make stew meat and stuff out of. You can cut some kind of steaks out of here, especially if you got a tenderizer. But for the most part, this is more of a roast cut. So there's the, it falls apart. There's your rump roast. We've taken that out. And then, like I said, what's left is the shank, and that'll be cut into burger. We'll cut all the silver skin and all the tendons out of it, clean it up, chunk it so it can be ground into burger. And that is how you cut up a deer. Hope you all have enjoyed this, and I hope if you get a chance, you try to butcher your own deer. If you haven't done that before, or if you've done it and not been real successful, hope we've given you some tips you can use. And let me tell you that if you don't get it just right, it'll still cook and it'll still be good. So we'll see y'all later.